A 47-year-old sailor was walking along the dunes of Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, when he stumbled upon something eerie protruding from the sand. It looked like a mannequin, life-sized, fiberglass, and eerily intact, partially buried as if placed there deliberately. At first he thought it was just debris from the recent storm, but when he pulled it upright, something inside shifted, and a soft clatter echoed from within. The surface had tiny holes, ventilation slits, almost invisible, and hidden compartments inside. What he found next made his blood run cold. Sealed, expired food packs and tiny faded clothes for children. When investigators arrived, they didn't speak for several moments. Then one muttered, "This wasn't meant to be found." What was this thing doing buried in the sand? Who or what was it designed to carry? Brent Mallory had lived most of his life near the sea. At 47, with salt-creased eyes and hands tougher than rope, he was the kind of man who spoke little but noticed everything. He had served as a deckhand in his early 20s, then graduated to his own small fishing vessel that patrolled the Atlantic waters just off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Locals knew him as dependable, maybe a little too quiet, but always ready to lend a hand when tides turned rough or someone got themselves in trouble. The day began like so many others. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the sky clear and the sea strangely calm. Brent had tied his boat early, deciding to walk the beach for salvage. After big storms, it wasn't unusual for odd things to wash ashore. Broken lobster traps, ship parts, the occasional buoy half buried in the dunes. With a thermos of lukewarm coffee in one hand and a rusted hook stick in the other, Brent moved slowly along the coastline, scanning the sand like a hawk. Pieces of driftwood and shredded netting lay tangled with seaweed. A dead gull, half covered in kelp, marked the violence of the previous night, but then something unusual caught his eye. About 40 feet up the beach near the edge where the dunes sloped upward into brush, something pale and slick protruded from the sand, an unnatural shape that glinted briefly in the sun. Brent paused, narrowed his eyes. It wasn't wood, wasn't bone, didn't match anything he'd seen washed up before. He approached cautiously, jabbing the hook stick into the sand around it, clearing space. The shape extended downwards at a shallow angle, like it had been embedded, not simply dropped. And then he realized it was a human torso. His heart knocked once, hard, but something was off. Too smooth, too perfect. The surface was fiberglass, not skin, and there were no arms, no head. Just the upper torso, pale grayish-white, with a slightly artificial sheen. A mannequin? He circled it slowly, brushing more sand away. The detail was eerie, too realistic. There were even molded ribs, a suggestion of a collarbone, but the back of the figure had fine grooves along the shoulder blades and faint seams that weren't decorative. They were functional. He crouched, ran a finger across the grooves, and realized they weren't cracks. They were hatch lines. Curiosity piqued. Brent wrapped both arms around the torso and pulled. It resisted at first, then broke free with a sucking pop, as if the sand didn't want to let go. He laid it upright, balancing the hollow structure on its base, and that's when he felt it. A shift. Something inside the torso had moved, like an object settling in a suitcase. Then came the sound. A soft metallic clink, followed by a sliding scrape. Not heavy, but unmistakable. Brent's gut twisted. Whatever was inside wasn't waterlogged debris. He tilted the figure slightly. Again, that clatter. A sudden gust of wind sent a spray of sand into his face. He coughed, stepped back, and instinctively looked around. The beach was deserted. Just him, the gulls, the waves, and this thing. He noticed the slits next. Tiny, barely visible along the rib lines. Ventilation holes, no more than a few millimeters wide, like you'd find on a hidden speaker or something meant to breathe through. Something clicked in Brent's mind, and it wasn't a pleasant sound. He didn't scare easily, but this wasn't driftwood or debris. It was something crafted, designed, buried. With trembling hands, he turned the torso over. There was a latch on the base, flush with the surface, nearly invisible. He hesitated. Years on the water had taught him that sometimes you're better off not knowing what you've dredged up. But his fingers moved anyway. He pressed the latch. The back of the mannequin creaked open with a muffled hiss. Inside were two thin compartments, shaped like the inner cavity of a chest. There were no electronics, no weapons, just a tightly packed layer of objects wrapped in dull plastic, food pouches, expired judging by the dates, and cloth. fabric bundled tightly. Brent picked one out, unfolded it. It was a child's shirt, tiny, faded pink with a cartoon bear on the front. He turned it over. The tag was printed in Spanish. He sat back, stunned. This wasn't a mannequin, it was a container. And it had been meant to carry something, or someone, far smaller than him. Brent's mind raced. Was this part of a shipwreck? A lost prop from some bizarre art installation? But the sand around it showed no signs of long-term burial. It had been recently uncovered. Perhaps the storm had dislodged it. The waves hissed behind him, oblivious. He stood, pulling out his phone. No signal. Of course. He took pictures anyway, then reburied the torso halfway to mark the spot and jogged the half-mile stretch back toward the marina. He needed someone else to see this, someone who could help make sense of what he'd found. Brent wasn't a man given to wild stories. He'd seen his share of strange things at sea. But this was different. When he got back to town, he went first to his neighbor, Sarah Feldman, a retired Coast Guard technician who'd worked port security for years. She listened carefully as he showed her the photos, her expression growing darker with every swipe. She looked up and said just one thing: "We need to call this in." That evening, as twilight wrapped around the sleepy harbor town, Brent found himself back on the beach, this time with 2 sheriff's deputies and an agent from the local Homeland Security unit. Sarah had made some calls, pulled some strings. They brought gear, cameras, and gloves. The tone was quiet but serious. Brent led them to the spot. The tide hadn't reached it yet. One of the deputies knelt and opened the back panel, gently extracting the contents. The food packs were dated 1994. The clothes, 2 shirts, a tiny pair of pants and socks, were preserved but weathered. The Homeland Security agent, a lean woman named Lyons, examined the ventilation holes closely. Then she took photos of the latch mechanism, noting the smoothness of the design. "This wasn't amateur," she murmured. The beach seemed to grow colder. Brent asked what she thought it was. She didn't answer directly, just said, "This looks a lot like what we used to find hidden in cargo ships." When he asked what kind of cargo, she looked at the child's shirt and said nothing. Later that night, back home, Brent couldn't sleep. His thoughts spun in dark circles. What if there had been more than one of those mannequins? What if they were still out there buried in sand or rotting in shipyards? What if someone had once climbed inside one and waited, breathing through those tiny holes, clutching the tiny food packs, praying to arrive somewhere safe? And what if they never made it? He posted one photo online, just the exterior of the mannequin, no details. He wanted to see if anyone had ever seen something like it. By morning, the post had hundreds of comments. Most were confused guesses: old museum piece, art prop, training dummy. But one comment stood out. It came from a user with no profile picture, no name, just a line. They called them ghosts. They floated in steel coffins beneath sugar shipments. Look up Mexico Charleston route, 1992. Brent copied the text, heart thudding. He didn't know what he'd found, but someone else clearly did, and maybe they didn't want it found at all. Like this video if you're as disturbed as we are by what was buried in the sand. Subscribe for more mysterious and real stories from the edges of the known, and let us know in the comments. What do you think this was really used for? Also, tell us where you're watching from. We read every single location you share. Brent didn't go back to the beach the next day. Instead, he stayed in his workshop behind the house, staring at the printouts of the photos he'd taken. The mannequin, if he could even call it that, sat in grainy resolution on cheap paper, but the image was haunting. The way it stood, semi-upright in the sand, slits like invisible eyes along its surface, an object meant to be hidden, built to deceive, and it had done just that, for decades, maybe longer. The words from that anonymous comment looped in his mind. They called them ghosts. Who were they? Was this some code used by law enforcement, smugglers, victims? He called Sarah again. She didn't answer. By late afternoon, the curiosity was unbearable. He needed to see it again, to know if it had been taken, or worse, if someone else had returned for it. He packed a small toolkit, a flashlight, gloves, a folding knife, a cheap stethoscope he once used to diagnose engine noises, and a portable radio. Something deep in his gut warned him not to go alone, but he brushed it off. When he reached the beach, the sand was littered with new debris. The wind had shifted, and tide lines were blurred, but he recognized the patch where the figure had been. It had left a distinct depression, a slight disruption in the pattern of the dunes. It was gone. At first he thought perhaps the authorities had removed it. That would make sense. Sarah said they'd handle it. But there were no tire tracks, no footprints, no drag marks. It hadn't been taken away. It had been dug out, neatly, surgically. The sand was smooth, filled back in. Someone had taken care to hide their presence. Brent dropped to his knees and began digging. He knew how to spot disturbed ground, how the sand behaved when it had been recently manipulated. A foot down, his fingers brushed something cold. A panel. Not the mannequin. Something else. Flat, square, metallic. He cleared more sand away until he uncovered what looked like a shipping plate. Rusted bolts lined its edges. It had markings, worn numbers, and a partial serial, barely readable under corrosion. He tapped it. Hollow. His mind jumped. A hatch, part of a larger crate. He lay flat and placed the stethoscope against the metal. Silence. Then, a faint creak. A hiss, maybe. Nothing definite, but not nothing. Suddenly, the radio on his hip crackled. Not a voice, just static, a wave of interference. Then silence. He froze. There was no one else around. No boats, no towers nearby. He scanned the dunes, still empty. Taking a deep breath, Brent returned to the panel. He slipped his knife beneath one of the rusted bolts, trying to pry it loose. It moved a little, just enough to prove it wasn't welded shut. He worked at it for several minutes, but as the sun dipped lower, a chill settled over the beach. Shadows grew longer. Something in the air shifted, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Brent stood and stepped back. He knew enough to trust his instincts. Something was wrong. He marked the spot again, this time with a piece of netting wrapped around a tall stick, and made his way home. That night, he didn't sleep either. He reviewed old newspaper clippings online, searching terms like ghost shipment, child smuggling mannequin, fiberglass torso container, but nothing credible came up. A few conspiracy forums, a blurry photo in a Colombian report from 1996, and mentions of hidden compartments in furniture used for trafficking. Still, nothing exactly like what he'd found. The next morning, he drove to the Coast Guard outpost north of the marina, only to find Sarah already there. She was speaking with two men in plain clothes who weren't local law enforcement. Brent recognized the look. Federal. He waited until they left before approaching her. She didn't smile. "You shouldn't go back to the beach," she said. "I already did." She sighed, motioned for him to follow. Inside her office, she closed the door and drew the blinds. "They took the torso last night," she said. "Not the sheriff, someone higher. Didn't say who they were with, just showed a badge and took it. No paper trail, no explanations." "Did you ask them?" "I did. They said it was part of an ongoing investigation. But I don't think they were telling me everything." Brent showed her the photo of the hatch he'd uncovered. Her eyes widened. "Where is that?" "Same spot, just deeper." Sarah leaned back. "Then we need someone to go down there, professionally." "I can't let this go, Sarah. Something's buried down there. Something more than that thing." She hesitated, then said, "I might know someone." That evening, she introduced Brent to her cousin, Dean Rivers, a private salvage diver who'd done contract work for the Navy and specialized in recovering lost cargo off the Carolina coast. Dean was wiry, sun-baked, and skeptical, but after Brent showed him the pictures and described what he'd heard under the hatch, he agreed to take a look. At dawn, the three of them returned to the beach. This time, Dean brought equipment: a metal detector, sonar scanner, digging tools, and ground-penetrating radar. Dean swept the area for nearly an hour before stopping dead. "There's something big under here," he said. 2 meters long, maybe a meter wide, rectangular. "A crate?" Brent asked. Dean didn't answer right away. He just said, "Let's dig." They worked for hours, careful not to collapse the structure below. As they cleared away the sand, the shape took form. It was a crate, old, heavily corroded and sealed tight. No markings, no obvious hinges, just steel and rust. Then Dean found the latch. He stepped back. "You want to open this now?" Brent nodded. They pried it open. Inside, they found 2 more fiberglass torsos. Identical design. One had its back panel ajar. It was empty. The other was sealed. Dean opened it. What they found inside stopped them cold. A mold of a small human frame, lined with padded restraints and foil insulation. A ventilation system ran along the spine, fitted with outdated battery compartments. Dried food packs were strapped inside, labeled in Spanish, and beneath them, in a plastic sleeve, were papers, a manifest, handwritten, names, ages, destinations, all of them marked with country codes, HND, GUA, MEX, children. Brent stared at the list. Most were marked with a red slash, but a few had a circle drawn beside them. No explanation. Dean said nothing for a long time. Then, this wasn't for one-time use. Sarah took photos and sent a coded message to a former contact in Customs Intelligence. They couldn't trust local law enforcement now, not after what had happened with the torso's disappearance. Brent turned to Sarah. Why would they bury it here? Because this place is remote, she said. Quiet. And after a storm like the one we had, any evidence left behind can be passed off as debris. Dean nodded. Or they never meant to leave it. They just never came back for it. That night, Brent received another anonymous message on his original post. It read, "You're close. Look for the barge manifest from 1993, out of Veracruz. Destination was modified to Charleston, then disappeared. Don't trust the company name. It's fake. Follow the barcode on the crate if it's still readable. That'll tell you where the other ones were sent." He showed it to Sarah. She looked pale. The barcode. They hadn't noticed one yet, but Dean had taken photos of the crate exterior. Zooming in on the rusted edge, beneath years of decay, there it was, a faint rectangle, scannable with the right tools. The trail wasn't cold. It was waking up. Brent sat quietly for a long while that night. He remembered a storm, years ago, when a lifeboat had washed ashore 5 miles north. It had been empty, no name, no records of a missing vessel. Now he wondered if that lifeboat hadn't belonged to some unlucky sailor, but had been ejected from a freighter carrying ghosts. If these torsos were used to smuggle children, how many had made it, and how many had been abandoned? And most chilling of all, were more of them still buried along the coast, waiting for someone to lift them upright and feel something shift inside? Let us know in the comments what you think was inside those other containers, and how something like this could stay hidden for so long. Also, tell us where in the world you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Like and subscribe if this story kept you thinking, and stay with us. The deeper we dig, the darker it gets. The morning after discovering the second cache, Brent, Sarah, and Dean stood in a quiet room inside the old customs building near Morehead City. The mood was heavy. A contact Sarah trusted, Detective Marcus Leland, a retired federal investigator turned private consultant, had agreed to meet them. He didn't come alone. With him were 2 professionals from the Center for Maritime Forensics, a quiet but highly trained agency that occasionally assisted with deep-sea container investigations. They specialized in situations where criminal evidence might be hidden in international waters or buried by time. The moment Marcus saw the photos of the fiberglass torso, his brow furrowed. He didn't speak until he had examined every image twice. Then he looked at Brent and said, "I've seen this once before. In Cartagena, mid-90s. Brent leaned forward. What was it? A smuggling capsule, designed to look like debris or equipment, made to blend in with cargo on container ships. You find one of these, it usually means someone was being moved without detection. Not drugs. People." Sarah glanced at the list they'd recovered from the crate. Children. Marcus nodded slowly. "That's not the first list like that, but it's the first I've seen in years. Most records were destroyed or sealed by now. The routes changed after 1997. He turned to one of the forensic experts, a woman named Dr. Vivian Ung. She was already running a UV light across the surface of the manifest they'd extracted from the crate. Beneath the handwriting, invisible ink flared faintly. Coordinates, or what looked like a coded set of entries. Vivian murmured, "This list was designed to mean nothing if captured. But look, see this numbering sequence at the bottom? That's a barge ID. Old Panamax-style container ships used similar codes, but this one has a prefix I've only seen in bootleg manifests. This crate wasn't supposed to go through any official port." Brent felt a chill. "So how did it get here?" Vivian didn't look up. "Someone dumped it, or hid it, probably after something went wrong." Dean stood against the wall, arms crossed. "Or maybe someone buried it on purpose. Like they planned to come back." The team made a decision. They needed to revisit the site, and fast. Word was getting out. Brent's original photo post, despite being taken down, had been re-uploaded by others. Some viewers were theorizing everything from alien abductions to underground child camps. The internet was doing what it always did, distorting truth into spectacle. But the facts remained. Something real had been found, and someone somewhere didn't want it to be. They returned to the site with proper equipment this time: ground-penetrating radar, a drone to scan the shoreline, and full excavation gear. Brent noted how different the beach looked now under the weight of suspicion and scrutiny. The wind no longer felt refreshing. It felt invasive, carrying eyes from places he couldn't see. Vivian directed the scanning process. Within 30 minutes, they identified not one, but 3 more anomalies buried along a 30-yard stretch of dune. Each was roughly the same size: long, narrow, shallow in depth, matching the dimensions of the first crate. Vivian said, "There's a pattern here. These weren't dumped. They were stored. Someone used this beach as a temporary cache point." "But why here?" Sarah asked. "Because it's forgotten," Marcus said. "And because the sand buries secrets better than the sea ever could." They began digging. The first new crate was empty. Its panel swung open on rusted hinges. Inside were only shredded padding and the crumpled remnants of foil. The second was worse. Its lock had corroded, but when they finally got it open, the stench hit them like a blow. Brent turned away instinctively. Inside, wrapped in an oily tarp, was a decaying mass, unrecognizable at first, until Vivian carefully peeled away layers. Child-sized shoes, a rib cage partially intact, the faint imprint of a spine. No name, no ID, just the silent, permanent presence of someone who had once been inside that fiberglass shell and never made it out. Sarah covered her mouth. Brent couldn't move. He had spent his life on the water, but nothing had prepared him for this. Vivian whispered, "They left them here. They never planned to come back." Marcus shook his head. Or they were interrupted. They didn't open the third crate that day. Instead, they sealed the site, marked it as evidence, and radioed for federal containment. This wasn't local anymore. This wasn't a mystery you could explain to a town council or a regional sheriff. It was the beginning of something much larger. Back at the lab, Vivian had a breakthrough. She'd managed to trace the partial barge code from the first crate to a defunct shipping company registered in Belize, but operating out of Veracruz in the early 90s. The company's name, Loro Azul Trading. No records existed after 1994. It was wiped from maritime logs. Yet during its last year of operation, it had registered 6 transits toward the southeastern U.S., routes that had all been officially logged as carrying industrial machine parts. Vivian found no machine parts listed on the manifests, just weight measurements that didn't match any known containers. She looked up from her screen. They were moving bodies disguised as cargo. The weights make sense if you factor for water and fiberglass shells. Dean's voice was hard. "How many?" "Over 70 units total," Vivian said. 6 routes, each with 12 or more. Brent sat in silence. Children, dozens, moved like freight, hidden in torsos designed to keep them quiet, faceless, voiceless. And no one ever noticed? Or worse, someone had noticed and buried the truth. The next day, Brent received a third message. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It came from a user named Watcher 7th Doc. The message was simple. The ones that disappeared didn't all die. Some reached shore. Ask about the Harbor Island raid, April 1995. Brent forwarded it to Marcus, who turned pale. "I was there," Marcus said. "Not on the ground, but I read the report." He pulled up the file from a private drive. Redacted lines. Names missing. But the summary was clear. In 1995, federal agents raided a warehouse near Harbor Island, South Carolina. They'd received a tip about suspicious crates arriving after dark. The crates were gone by the time they arrived. But what they found were scraps, food pouches, child-sized bedding, one fiberglass torso, empty. The raid was never made public. The evidence disappeared into classified channels. No arrests, no press, just a sealed report. Marcus leaned back. They moved the operation right before the raid. It wasn't luck. Someone tipped them off. Brent stared at the screen. "Which means," he said slowly, "someone on the inside was helping them." Marcus nodded. "Or running it." The implications were staggering. A network that used custom-made containers, moved them through falsified cargo routes, and had the ability to erase its tracks with government complicity. Brent said what everyone was thinking. How many of those kids were never found? Vivian's answer was quiet. We'll never know. Brent stood at the window, looking out toward the Atlantic. Somewhere out there, more secrets waited. More fiberglass torsos lost beneath time and tide. Maybe some were still drifting. Maybe some had been broken apart and burned. Or maybe, just maybe, one was sitting right now in an abandoned warehouse, forgotten, still sealed. Like this video if this story moved you, and subscribe to uncover what the tides may still be hiding. And here's our question for today. If someone created this network, hidden, professional, systemic, who do you think was truly behind it? A private organization, a rogue agency, or something even more hidden? We'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. And don't forget to tell us, where are you watching from? You never know how close this story might have come to your own shores. Federal authorities sealed the beach 2 days later. Marked with orange barriers and surveillance signs, the area around the buried crates was declared a restricted zone for environmental and historical forensic analysis. But the locals knew better. Rumors spread fast in small coastal towns, and Brent noticed how strangers began showing up at the diner, well-dressed, quiet, with that unmistakable look of people who asked questions without asking them out loud, the kind who already knew. He hadn't heard from Sarah since the second day of the investigation. She stopped replying to texts. Dean had gone back to Wilmington on a salvage job, promising to return if needed, but something in his voice suggested he wouldn't. Brent sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the latest update from Vivian. She'd been pulled from the case, officially reassigned. Unofficially, she left him one last message. The remaining coordinates match an abandoned marina near Fernandina Beach, Florida, 1996. Final cargo drop listed under maintenance shipment, non-perishable. That was the last anyone heard from her. Marcus, ever the realist, told Brent not to pursue it. They'll bury it deeper, he warned. And if you dig too far, you'll go down with it. But Brent had already decided. He couldn't forget what he'd seen. Couldn't erase the sound of the crate opening, or the image of a tiny shirt folded inside a fake body designed to fool everyone. He returned to the beach at dawn. No equipment, just himself and a thermos of black coffee. The sand was smooth now, the holes refilled, as if nothing had happened. But he knew better, and so did others. That evening, a story aired briefly on a foreign news channel, just a 30-second segment. A mysterious American operation under investigation involving old shipping manifests and possible human trafficking evidence. It didn't name Brent, didn't mention the mannequins. By morning, the clip had vanished from the network's site, scrubbed clean. Brent began getting mail, photos, unmarked envelopes with grainy images, another torso found in Indonesia in 1999, a cache of fiberglass components found in a burned-out warehouse in New Jersey in 2001. Even a customs report from a Dutch port that referred to passenger shells disguised as shipping insulation. They all pointed to one chilling conclusion. This was never just one beach, one ship, one smuggling run. It was a system, refined, reused, forgotten by design. He stood in his garage that night, surrounded by the evidence he'd collected. Photos, fragments, the original shirt sealed in a glass box. Every piece screamed the same question. How many were there? And how many more were still waiting to be found? One final message arrived, written on a napkin and tucked beneath his front doormat. No envelope, no signature, just 7 words. You opened one. Now they're watching you. Brent looked out his window. Across the harbor, a black SUV sat parked, engine idling. No one got out. He didn't call the police. Instead, he turned back to his table, picked up the photograph of the first mannequin, and whispered what he hadn't dared say until now. I'm not letting this go. Weeks passed. Eventually, the beach reopened. The signs came down. No official report was ever released. Locals said it had all been overblown, a misunderstanding, a strange art piece maybe, nothing serious. But the fishermen knew, and Brent knew. He'd pulled something out of the sand that wasn't meant to surface, something that wasn't driftwood or debris or lost history. It was a warning. And it wasn't finished. So what really happened at Cape Hatteras? Who buried those torsos in the sand? And why did they vanish so quickly after being discovered? Could there be more passenger shells hidden across other ports, deserts, or even sealed in the hulls of ships no longer sailing? And who, if anyone, survived? Tell us what you believe is still out there. Was this an isolated operation, or the remnants of a far-reaching system designed to erase children without leaving a trace? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your theories. Where are you watching from? If you live near a coastline, what would you do if you found something buried? Something that looked almost human but wasn't. Like this video if this story chilled you to the bone. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more real mysteries that almost disappeared forever. And turn on notifications, because the next story might be even darker. The sea hides more than it reveals, but sometimes it gives you one last chance to see the truth. Don't miss it.